From the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center, HEC-TV, Boeing, and the Danforth Center are proud to present Conversations, a discussion about long-term solutions to world hunger.
Good evening, everyone. I think we're about ready to begin. I wanted to welcome everyone this evening. My name is Robin Frankel, and I am chair of the Friends Committee. And the Friends organization is the group that sponsors the Conversations series. I want to begin by expressing our appreciation to the Boeing Company, which is the underwriter for the past 4 years for the Conversations program, and we certainly appreciate their support. This evening's program is being taped, so if you have friends that weren't able to make it this evening and you want to tell them about the program, they can see this on HEC-TV beginning on Sunday, November 27th at 5 p.m. And if you are a Charter customer, it will be on channel 989, which is digital, and for AT&T customers, it will be on channel 99. As you entered the auditorium this evening, I hope that you picked up a card that you can write your questions on, and there will be ushers circulating through the audience during the program collecting these cards for your questions. Also, on that same card will be the bios for our speakers this evening. So as you're writing your question, take a look at their bios, which are extraordinarily impressive. If there is time at the end of the program, questions will be taken from the floor, and if that happens, please wait for someone to bring you a microphone before you ask your question. I also want to talk about the Friends organization. Many of you here this evening are members of the Friends, and if you are not a member of the Friends organization, we encourage you to become one. Actually, we encourage you to become a member of the Friends if you can, as quickly as possible, because the end of the year is coming. There will be direct mail pieces going out, but hopefully most of you who are members have already renewed. If not, this is your reminder call to please renew your membership. The Danforth Plant Science Center, as you know, is a nonprofit organization, and it is the support from people like you that really do make a difference. This evening happens to be my last program as chair of the Friends Committee, and I want to announce that my successor will be Matt Wolf, and Matt, for the past 2 years, has been chair of the Conversations program. So I am very pleased to be able to pass the baton on to Matt. I also want to take a moment to thank my predecessors who were chairs of the Friends Committee and actually set an unbelievable bar for me to try to measure up to. Bob Virgil, Jim Knight, and Derek Rapp. And so I want to thank them for setting the bar and being chair of the Friends Committee such an unbelievable opportunity. I also want to thank the Center's development staff because they really made being chair of the Friends effortless. Laura Chauvin, Tom Bander, and Tam McGuire, who I've worked with very closely for the last 2 years. There's a number of other people who are on the Danforth Plant Science Center staff who have also contributed to making this job seem effortless and unbelievably enjoyable. And during my tenure, there have been many changes at the Danforth Plant Science Center, including the transition from Roger Beachy to Phil Needleman, and most recently to Jim Carrington. And the bottom line is that it's been absolutely wonderful working with all of them. They are incredible leaders. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not mention that it's been an unbelievable pleasure and honor to work so closely with Dr. Danforth to achieve his vision for feeding the hungry and improving human health, preserving and renewing the environment, and enhancing our region as a world center of plant science. So once again, being a friend of the Danforth Plant Science Center is a most rewarding experience, and I encourage all of you who are friends to please stay involved. And I want to encourage anyone who's not already a friend to become one, and to become one before the end of the year. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed moderator, Professor Jim Davis, and our distinguished panelists, Dr. Kathy Kahn and Dr. Paul Anderson. And before I actually step down, I just want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving.
Tonight, to focus attention on hunger and malnutrition throughout the world, we have two guests who are particularly well suited to help us understand the complexity of the problems we face. You have biographies on the little question cards you picked up, so my introductions can be quite brief. Kathy Kahn is a senior program officer for the Agricultural Development Program of the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation. She has a PhD in molecular biology and biochemistry, and is clearly a plant biologist. It's nice to welcome her back to the Danforth Plant Science Center. In 2003, 2004, she was a visiting scientist here working with the cassava research team. Welcome.
Thanks, it's good to be back.
Paul Anderson, on my immediate right, is also a PhD in biochemistry. He is director of the International Programs Office here at the Plant Science Center. He's been here since 2008, and he came to the position with 25 years of experience working with the development of a variety of crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, all of which are obviously important grains. Their productivity, their virus resistance, their nutrition, all need work. I'm delighted to have these guests here tonight as we think about hunger and malnutrition to help us understand the scope of the problem. And indeed, that's where I think I want to start the conversation. How serious is the hunger and malnutrition problem? We have 7 billion people on the world now. How many are hungry?
The FAO position on this, who probably does the best counting that I'm aware of, states that there's a billion of those 7 billion people are chronically malnourished. That means pretty much throughout the year they're hungry and not getting the right balance of nutrients. But additionally, there's probably another billion people that during some portion of the year are getting insufficient food.
So, and I think you can certainly emphasize that there are 2 billion people who don't have enough food to eat in the world, and that's a terrific problem. But if you think about it from the perspective of agriculture, about 75% of the world's poorest people actually grow their own food, their own crops. So while it's a tremendous problem, it's also a tremendous opportunity, because so many farming families are living in poverty, and if we can help them to access better inputs for agriculture, then agricultural development is a way to help reduce the hunger and poverty that those farming families face, and to help them create new pathways out of poverty.
Well, you get to a question that was surely on my mind, and that is, do we focus directly on hunger, or do we focus directly on poverty, or do we work on both problems simultaneously? The other thing I'm interested in is, with regard to what you could think of as the hungry population, I suspect a lot of those are children. Is
Absolutely.
there any data on child malnutrition which would stunt growth, retard development, and so on?
So there's a couple of different questions that you're asking there, Jim, and I think one of the important ones you asked is, what do we focus on? Do we focus on hunger? Do we focus on poverty? And I think where we're coming from at the Gates Foundation is, if we can focus on increasing the sustainable productivity of these farming families, if we can help these farming families grow more food, more nutritious food, then they'll be able to feed their families. So that will address the nutrition problem. But we also hope that as people produce more and they're able to sell that and connect to markets, that they'll have more income. So that as well as feeding their families more, they'll be able to earn more money so that kids can go to school, they can buy shoes and clothes and medicine.
You talked for just a few seconds about the Gates Foundation in particular, but we obviously also have someone here from the Danforth Plant Science Center. How do the two organizations, what brings us together beyond hunger?
So crudely, the Danforth Center helps us spend the Gates money, which I think is really is fantastic. So
we get credit for being helpful, in other words.
One of the things that we say in Seattle is that we don't do the work. So sitting in Seattle, although we're traveling a lot, we don't actually do the work. The work, to work with farmers and to produce the crops that are more nutritious and hardier, that's done by the grantees. So the Gates Foundation is a grant-making organization. We work with grantees like the Danforth Center to empower them to do the work that needs to happen in partnership with farmers, wherever possible, farming organizations, local researchers, to reach the farming families that we all care about.
And the Plant Science Center also works overseas with farmers or with experimental crops. What gets us overseas?
Let me back up and add something to what Kathy just
Sure,
said.
of course.
Because we're moving along very quickly here. I wanted to comment that one of the three main thrusts of the Gates Foundation is to help to support crop improvement, particularly of crops that are especially important to those small farmers that we were talking about just a moment ago. And the Danforth Center has capabilities in order to carry out that crop improvement work, but we couldn't do that without the support of the Gates Foundation. So it's a critical tie that exists here.
Let me take your phrase, crop improvement. Crop improvement might be virus resistance. Crop improvement might be making the crop more nutritious. Crop improvement might make it drought resistant. All of the above, one of the above, or something else. What are you including in crop improvement?
All of the above. The way I like to think about it, though, is two big buckets. One of those is improving yields, removing the impediments to getting the best yields possible, regardless of whether it's dealing with biotic stresses or physical stresses like drought and water. But where most organizations work, they only consider yield. We put an equal emphasis on the quality of the crop, of the quality of the material that's produced by the farmer. So in our case, what's important there is the nutritional quality of that crop. So we've got about half of our effort focused on improving yields, and about half of that additional effort focused on making sure that those yields are of quality nutrients.
And if I could add one more point to that, so I think the increasing the yields and the increasing the quality is important too, but I also think it's important to reduce the risks that farmers face. So, you've mentioned diseases. There are a lot of various diseases that can afflict crop plants, including the cassava viruses, including another project we work on with protecting wheat against rust diseases. And in those situations, farmers can stand to lose a lot of their crop. I mean, they're facing tremendous risks. So even if we can help farmers maintain the yields that they get and have a steady harvest and a steady income, then that's a powerful intervention as well.
Well, I want to follow up on the yield. I want to follow up on nutrition too. But in addition to yield, which is terribly important, I don't know quite how to put this, but I'm interested also in preserving the yield from rodents, from spoilage, mold, from just, use the general word, spoilage and waste, so that what in fact is grown can be either used or sold. Is that a problem? Once you get yield, Do the farmers have sufficient storage facility or access to market, good distribution systems, so they benefit from increased yield?
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely critical, what we call protecting the crop post-harvest. And there's, a lot of potential losses there. And that's an area that we're certainly interested in. Actually, if I could make a brief plug, there's 2 days left on a challenge that we have called the Grand Challenges Explorations, where we've put an open challenge for $100,000 grants for anybody. Everybody here is eligible to apply for one.
Even a political scientist?
That's right, even a political scientist. So if you have an idea for a way to help protect crops against losses, so both in the field but also after harvest,
Yes.
then we're looking for new ideas on ways to do that, and the deadline's in 2 days' time. So it's only a 2-page application, so you've got...
Now, I want to come back to nutrition. How do you decide what your nutritional goals or targets are if you're dealing with cassava, or you're dealing with rice, you're dealing with maize? What's the limit, or where do you start?
Yeah. Let me address that. Just one additional comment on the spoilage, though.
Yeah.
The estimated losses, and this is worldwide, is about 40% of what the food that's produced is lost to waste. It's different depending upon where you are. In Africa, it's 40%, but it's lost before you ever get a chance to eat it for the most part. In the United States, it's lost because it's thrown away or spoiled because it's overabundant. But nonetheless, it's 40%. I didn't want to go off on a tangent, but I just wanted to complete that last.
If you can reduce the spoilage, that's as good as increasing yield.
We're talking then about 80% increase in yield if you remove that spoilage.
But also market opportunities for farmers, because if all the farmers in Africa are selling their maize at the same point in time, they don't get such a good price for it. But if they can store their maize and sell it at different times during the year, then that's an advantage.
Sure.
So to the nutritional targets, we work with food security crops, staple crops that individuals in developing countries eat on a daily basis. They get their primary calories from these crops, eat them the same things for breakfast, and dinner for large parts of the year. Any food stuff that's consumed in that sort of way is going to result in malnutrition, because no food stuff has the mixture of nutrients that are important to keep a person healthy. So given that, then an individual crop like cassava will have particular nutrients that it's especially short of. In the case of cassava, it's vitamin A, it's iron and zinc, it's very low in protein, and different crops will have different deficiencies. And so what needs to be addressed are the things that are most deficient. But on the top of that, the things that are deficient that are most important. And the way that's generally gauged is by how much vitality of the person or productivity of a person is lost as a result of that deficiency. That might be through premature death. It might be through just being not developing to the extent that you would be able to otherwise, or just not being able to perform up to a normal capacity. So in that case, given that, vitamin A comes out very high worldwide as one of the biggest problems. Vitamin A deficiency is one of the biggest problems in that regard. And the minerals, the essential minerals, iron and zinc, are quite close behind.
And take vitamin A a step further. Is that the vitamin that's related to vision?
It is the vitamin that's related to vision. Its precursor is beta-carotene, which is in carrots. That's why your mother has told you to eat your carrots. And so that's what gives the orange color to carrots, and that's the precursor of vitamin A, retinol, in the body after it's consumed.
And take this a step further. Biotechnology comes up. Do you improve the nutrition through genetic modification, through improving the crop, and will that crop then be acceptable, plantable in Tanzania or Kenya or wherever?
Yeah. Our general rule of thumb, I think most people's general rule of thumb, is that if you can develop or improve the crop by classical plant breeding approaches, that's the way you do it, because the probability of success is much higher. But for many of these traits, there's not the diversity in the plant itself to be able to do effective breeding to reach the targets that you want to reach, in which case there's really no alternative other than to use biotechnology tools to achieve those. And so in many of these cases, biotechnology is absolutely critical. And yes, one can make these improvements so that those improvements, and this is one of the things that the technology gives you, is that those improvements are very specific and deal only with your target and therefore safe from all other perspectives.
And is the Gates Foundation actively supporting biotechnical approaches to improving crops, whether virus resistant or increased nutrition?
Yeah, so we support a variety of approaches. We take the view that increasing agricultural productivity and quality is a complex problem, and there's not going to be one simple, single answer to that.
Sure.
And what we focus on is what do farmers need? What do farming families need?
How do you find out what the farmers need?
So a lot of different ways. So you try to spend time talking to farmers, listening to them, talking to farmer organizations. We consult a lot with experts in the field, people here at the Danforth Center, scientists in Africa and Asia. So we spend a lot of time listening and trying to understand what the issues are. We also spend quite a lot of time collecting data. So we have projects that partner, for example, with the World Bank. They go out and do these surveys very regularly that are very detailed health surveys. So partnering with them, we've added questions specific to agriculture. What are people growing? Why are they growing it? The nutritional status, so that we can get data on what the issues are, where the key issues are. But I just wanted to circle back to your biotech question, Jim, because I didn't want to dodge that. So at the foundation, we don't take a position in favor or opposed to any particular technology. What we look at is what's going to help farmers. And so exactly as Paul said, there are some cases where, for example, drought tolerance or some of the nutritional work, where you're going to be able to solve the problem that farmers are facing much more effectively using biotech than you are with conventional breeding. Having said that, the biotech work is a pretty small part of our overall portfolio. We've added it up, and I think it's about 7% of the agricultural research that we fund involves some kind of work with GMOs. It's an important part of the portfolio, and it's one part of the solution. It's one tool that we want farmers to have access to, but operating always within the guidelines and the regulations of countries and making sure that products are safe and effective.
Now, you said a minute ago that one of the ways you find out is to talk with farmers. What do they need? What do they want? What will they plant? Can you tell us a little bit about the farmers?
Sure.
They surely are small farmers.
Sure, and is that my cue to show you? I was told I couldn't bring a PowerPoint presentation, which is quite hard for a scientist, but I have a very compelling photo of a farmer that I met this summer in Tanzania. And it was on a visit. So I have to tell you, it was on a visit with our co-chairs, with Bill and Melinda, and we'd met this farmer. Her name's Christina, and she farms cassava and some maize and vegetables just outside Dar es Salaam. And so I knew we were coming with a photographer because we were making a documentary. And so the day before, she'd been wearing a completely traditional outfit. And so then we showed up after we'd done the pre-visit with Bill and Melinda, and there she was wearing and at first I just thought, oh, it's like a U.S. baseball T-shirt, and I didn't quite put it together. But then I mentioned to one of my colleagues that I was coming to St. Louis, and you have to show them the St. Louis Cardinals. And it's very true. I mean, this is what people wear in Africa. A lot of the sports T-shirts get shipped out there. So this is Christina, and this is actually a fairly typical farmer. We chose her just because her field happened to be next door to a malaria home visit that the foundation leaders were making, and she has 8 people in her family. She's growing a number of different cassava varieties. There are
how much land would she farm?
I think she was farming just over a hectare, I think. So it's a fairly small plot.
Maybe for the benefit of some of our audience, can you translate that into acres?
So perhaps 2 acres.
2.5.
Yeah, 2.5
okay.
acres. And it might have been less than that. I mean, I didn't measure it, but it's a fairly small plot. She lives near it. She has quite a few different cassava varieties, and she goes out and she harvests them every day. And she has one variety she likes for porridge for breakfast in the morning, another variety for stew. But and this is the sad thing in that part of Tanzania, the diseases are pretty bad. She had both cassava brown streak and cassava mosaic disease on her plot. And it was the impact on her yields meant that she was not growing enough cassava to feed her family of 8. So she was not producing enough because she was losing some to these diseases. And so instead she was purchasing cassava on the market to supplement the family's food. So this is the kind of farmer that we want to reach. If we can get Christina better cassava varieties so that they're protected against the disease and they have the taste characteristics and the nutritional characteristics that she needs, then she'll be able to feed her family better. She'll be able to save that money. She won't have to spend it on the market. And maybe she can even sell some on the market. So I did. Should I show you the other pictures? Or
If it's another Cardinals
Sorry,
picture,
right.
go for it.
Well, so it was just on the same trip. I just wanted you to see that. So this was her field, and you can see, I don't know if you can see, the cassava at the front is infected with cassava mosaic disease, so it's quite wrinkled. And this was with Bill and Melinda Gates, and they were asking her about, or like, does it taste? Because she eats the leaves as well. They cook the leaves in porridge. Does it taste different, when it's all mottled like that? And she said no, because she cooks it with coconut. But the other point here was the gentleman on the left, Joseph Ndunguru. He actually spent a couple of years here at the Danforth Center, and so he did his PhD work. And as part of that, he visited the center and spent time doing research here. And now he's back full time in Tanzania and actually leading one of our projects. And so I think that's an example of the impact that the Danforth Center can have in terms of hosting and training these outstanding African scientists who often can go home and really, have this kind of impact. So it was, that was.
Now, these are from Tanzania.
That's right, yes.
You work generally in sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia. How do you pick your geographic targets? How do you decide where you're going to work? Is it a matter of being welcomed? Is it a matter of the particular food problem that exists?
So it's a combination of factors. So the underlying philosophy at the Gates Foundation is a belief that all lives have equal value. And so just as Paul was addressing about how do you pick the nutritional problem, so we look at a problem and pick how many lives are being impacted by this. So how many people can we reach? So, how big is the problem? And then also, although we're blessed with wonderful resources, we recognize that the resources that we have are only going to provide a very small % of the overall solution. So we think in agriculture that we can contribute perhaps 2 to 3% of the overall need for agricultural development globally. And so that means that you have to work with other partners and that you have to coordinate and cooperate with others. So we tend to pick areas where we think our dollars can make the biggest difference, where we can have the biggest impact from the money that we put in, and that aren't areas that other people are focusing on where we feel there is a lack of attention to the problem, and that was the case with agriculture. So in terms of picking areas, we've actually just gone through this what's called at the Foundation a strategy refresh process. So looking at where are the investments that we've made, how are they doing, what do we need to focus on, and as part of that process, we're beginning to focus more on geographic areas and picking countries that have the greatest number of farmers who are dependent on agriculture and who could really benefit from more investments, and also where, like you say, where there's a welcome environment, where we don't force ourselves on anyone, but where do people want to work with us, where is there an interest, where is the government putting in place policies that could make a massive difference to farming families.
And what about the availability of markets or distribution systems, road networks, never mind absence of terrorism and a secure environment?
Yeah, so all of those are important, and I think we have to recognize that we can't do that alone. So, for example, at the foundation, we will not be responsible for building roads, but you're absolutely right. Building roads is critical for connecting to markets. So we have to recognize that we can't do it all, and that we have to work with other partners where that's possible. And so I think lately we've had a lot of conversations with the government of Ethiopia, and Ethiopia is putting a lot of investments into agricultural extension workers and health extension workers. So they're really training up a cadre of many thousands of people who will go out and work with farmers and provide them access to new seeds and new tools and new management approaches. So that's an example where the government's already investing, and by going in and partnering with them, we can come in as a neutral party because they recognize, that we're not in this to kind of make money ourselves or to boost trade or anything like that, but we want to help them reach as many farming families as possible. So we can discuss with them and learn from each other and bring the best thinking that we can get our hands on to bear on the problems, and then, but absolutely we don't go it alone.
Another question that occurs to me along these lines has to do overall with productivity. I read in something I saw from the Gates Foundation that in sub-Saharan Africa, the cereal yield is about 1 ton per acre. In this country, the cereal yield is about 7 tons per acre. So it's tools, it's practices, it's resources. But is it realistic on that 2.5 acres that Cardinals fan was farming? Is it realistic to think that she could get up to 7 tons per acre? Or should we settle for 2 or 3 tons per acre? What are the productivity goals?
So, I guess I approach life as an optimist. And if you look at a glass, I could say, well, it's 1/3 full and it's getting fuller. So in this case, I would say, absolutely, there's a huge productivity gap. But you can also look at that as a possibility, right? Like, imagine what's possible. Like, I think that farmer Christina could easily be getting 10 tons a hectare for cassava. It depends on the crop. So there's a real opportunity there to help farmers boost their yields. We know it can be done. Like, we know it's possible. So what we need to do is get farmers the tools so that they can deliver the results.
I can't resist asking, you're an optimist at heart, I'm a skeptic at heart probably. Do you have an example that you could point that Cardinals fan to saying, she got up to 10 tons per acre, you can too?
Yeah, actually I've met farmers in Tanzania who are getting 25 tons a hectare for cassava, because cassava is actually able to yield much more highly. And that's a farmer who's actually he's made friends with the local researchers. So he's gotten access, to the best varieties as they come out, and he always peppers them with questions about, what can we do so that we can improve our yields. And he's producing his cassava in a way that he's using clean cutting so they're free from diseases, and he's got the best available varieties coming through. So absolutely it's possible. Absolutely.
You're the optimist.
I am the optimist. But, it's not just for cassava. I mean, one of my favorite projects, it's not one I work on directly, is with rice. And so their scientists have developed rice that can effectively hold its breath underwater. So this is rice that can survive being submerged in floods for more than 10 days. And so there you actually go out into the fields in India and Bangladesh, and you can see farms where the farmer who was growing a regular rice, lost the crop in floods, and then a farmer who's growing a rice that contains this, it's the gene called sub-1A, and this is through conventional breeding, survives the floods. And so this variety, and what makes me optimistic, is that the farmers love it. So at the end of this year, there'll be 1 million families in India alone growing improved rice that can survive flooding.
They should also be planting that rice in Thailand, from what I've
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is, when you can get a product that really works, that has a compelling benefit, and then there's a lot of ifs, and there's a lot of work to be done to make it available. But if you can make that available to farmers and give them a choice, then farmers like Christina are going to choose those new varieties that help them, achieve their own goals for their lives.
Now we've mentioned cassava a fair bit, and now rice. Are there other crops, maize, wheat? What crops is the Danforth Plant Science Center focused on now? I know cassava is big here.
Cassava is about 70% of the work that goes on here, and the lab of Dr. Claude Fouquet has been very aggressive in helping to advance that crop. But there's also work going on here in disease-resistant maize, in ground nuts, sweet potato. And in addition, we in the International Programs Group do product development support, not just for the Danforth Center, but for institutions outside the Danforth Center. So we can extend that to work that we do on banana improvement, on sorghum improvement, cowpeas, and then also sweet potato outside as well as inside. So a real spectrum of the crops that we call orphan crops that aren't getting the attention from other sources because there's not good commercial markets for them, yet they're ripe to have technology or just better management approaches brought to them to increase their yields.
I have a lot of other questions, but let me turn to some written questions. Kudos to Bill and the Gates Foundation, but my concern is what drastic steps should be taken to ensure that improved crops and other inputs get to farmers in rural areas of developing countries where the subject of today's discussion. We're hammering on that. And you certainly understand the issue. It's got to get out to people who will plant and harvest and so the question is what steps should be taken to ensure, or maybe the Gates Foundation and its partners are already taking the steps that need to be taken.
Yeah, so I mean, this is absolutely a critical question. Like, you can do the science, but how do you get it to the people who need it? And there's not like one single easy answer, and it varies from crop to crop. So let's take a couple of crops for an example. So a crop like wheat, which is very important for smallholder farmers in Ethiopia. That's a crop where if you get farmers a little bit of seed, a handful of seed, that they can try it on their farm and see how it works, then they can save the seed. They can save the seed, and if they like it, the next year they can plant more. That's a pretty easy, relatively easier crop to work with because it's self-seeded, and so it's easy to save the seed. Farmers in the US even save their seed for wheat often. Now that's the good news. The bad news for a crop like wheat is it makes it less attractive for the private sector to invest in producing wheat seed, because why would they when farmers can just save it? So it's kind of a good news, bad news scenario. But then for a crop like maize, that's a crop where farmers are better off purchasing seed from a supplier because you want hybrid maize. So you're better off if you get hybrid maize that's from two different parents, and so farmers will tend to come out ahead if they can purchase a source of hybrid maize. So the good news on that is that, well, then there's an incentive for private seed suppliers to supply maize, and so we're seeing, I think, more success right now initially with more private sector supplies of maize in sub-Saharan Africa. Now you take a crop like cassava, that's even more complicated. So there, farmers can absolutely save and replant cassava, but they do it by taking cuttings. So from a single cassava plant, you can maybe produce 8 cuttings that you would then go on to replant. And there it's a challenge for the seed system because of these virus problems. If your cassava plant's infected, so a farmer like Christina, she's replanting her cassava, she gets it from her neighbors, but she's planting cassava that's infected with viruses. So then that's a problem. So those are kind of 3 very different challenges for seed systems, and I wouldn't say it's an area that we have like absolutely clear, complete answers to yet, because we don't. It's complicated. Different people are going to be involved. There's going to be informal seed sector, like both for wheat and for cassava, where you have farmers individually growing the crop for seed and then selling it to their neighbors, bartering it, and extending it that way. You know, there's government seed companies in places like Ethiopia, but we also do want to encourage private enterprise with small-scale seed producers who can deliver seed. So it's something that we're very aware of. The kind of grants that I'm managing are much more on the research side because I'm a biologist, but I have colleagues who are very much focused on working with farmer organizations and with extension systems.
Sure.
Yeah.
A few minutes ago, we talked a little bit about biotechnology, GMO, and so on. Unfortunately, there are many people who are misinformed about the realities of biotech, especially safety issues. How do you respond to these misconceptions? And I'd add to that, are there misconceptions overseas in your target country as well as misconceptions in this country?
Yeah, so there are definitely misconceptions overseas. I mean, there are definitely misconceptions. I mean, I've met people in Africa who really think that eating biotech can make you sterile or, can cause cancer or something. So there's some way out there misconceptions. But then there's also misconceptions that have a grain of truth in them in terms of, like, who owns the technology. So, the thing is, like, it depends on the crop. So for a crop like cassava, when you improve that, with genetic modification, it's going to be available to people to share farmer to farmer as a public good. So, I think the way that we address the biotech is by focusing on what do farmers need. So I'll come back to this. We have a project, Water Efficient Maize for Africa, that is a grant to the African Agricultural Technology Foundation, but it partners with Monsanto here in St. Louis to access some of the best technology that's available from Monsanto for drought-tolerant maize. And we really expected at the foundation that we would get hit a lot for that, in the press, for, oh my goodness, you're partnering with Monsanto, and it's, very scary, and this, that, and the other. But we've actually been really surprised by the reaction in terms of how positive it is. And I think the reason for that is that when farmers talk about what they need and the clear challenge that drought faces, if you can help people understand, look, this is a real problem for farmers. These droughts come in and people lose their crops and they starve. And when you look at it through that lens, through what can we do to help people get access to more drought-tolerant maize, certainly for the farmers, they want solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So a farmer like Christina is not going to ask you, we have to make sure that we deliver her something that's safe and that is effective, but she has other problems to worry about than, is it GMO or is it not GMO? She wants something that's safe and effective to feed her family.
Sure.
I would like to add that
Sure.
probably just from another perspective, the most important way to gain the acceptance of people for biotechnology and the comfort with it is to show them the results of biotechnology efforts. And if you were to see a cassava plant that had been engineered growing in an infected field in Uganda, as we have been fortunate enough to have, it's just awesome. It's awesome. People are just absolutely amazed that this can be happening, and the word spreads fast that this technology can deliver that sort of thing. And I think the more that happens, the more the misinformation is going to go by the wayside.
Right. I don't want to minimize the challenges, because it is a lot more complex to deliver a product that's a GMO. Like, it's a lot more complex than it would be for a conventional product. So I think we have to choose examples, as Paul says, where it's compelling and there's a need. And we're also making investments, for example, with the African Union and the new Partnership for Africa's Development with Michigan State University, to help African regulators learn about the technology and make their own decisions.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question that's a bit of a surprise, but it's an interesting question. We're hearing that portions of the U.S. population believe it is not the role of the United States to feed the world. How do you convince these people of the validity of your work? And I think your work could be your work, Paul, or your work, Kathy.
So I think it's a good question. And, the world is becoming more global, but you can tell someone, well, there's 2 billion people that might be going to bed hungry tonight, and I think often that's not as compelling as understanding the situation of one person. So some of it is just helping people get access to stories about the real people, on the other side of the world, who happen to be wearing a baseball T-shirt that they wouldn't be able to tell you it was the St. Louis Cardinals, but that's someone who is a real person who, just like us, who needs help. So I think some of it is just an understanding and appreciating the situation of our fellow humans around the world.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, okay, so that's a kind of, bleeding heart answer. But you can also take a more pragmatic view. If people are hungry and they're angry and they don't have enough and there's a lot of poverty, they're a lot more likely to cause problems, and that's we look at hotbeds of terrorism and where people are coming from. If they don't have enough to eat, and if they're living in situations of tremendous injustice, then you're a lot more likely to have security problems.
I had wanted to bring that up too. It's hunger and poverty that are major causes of insurrection around the world. If one is thinking narrow-mindedly about feeding people, that's one thing. But if one is thinking about world peace, that's totally another. And I think that you do have to think about it in a broader scale.
The shorter answer, it seems to me, is that's in our interest to help people.
Right.
That sounds self-interested. Obviously it is,
Right.
but it's a broad view of self-interest.
Right, and I think if you can help people catch some of the excitement and the sense of possibility and the ability to make a difference, then I think that can encourage more involvement and engagement too.
How do you identify a partner? How do you identify a potential partner in Uganda or Kenya or Tanzania?
Yeah. Who we are working with most effectively are the agricultural research organizations that exist in that country. And these ARIs are like the equivalent of our ARS in the United States. They're like the USDA in the United States. So they're organizations that are funded by the government, and they are charged now with improvement of those crops by plant breeding and the dissemination of improved crops on an ongoing basis. So they're really the perfect partner. And in the case where that partner also has trained or has individuals that have been trained in a variety of different technologies, they become even better partners. So it's our choice to work with those because they have the tools in place to go all the way from a newly improved variety all the way out to be able to deliver it to the farmers. And they have correct people in place to be able to guide that.
Now, does the Gates Foundation also hunt for partners in its
Absolutely, and
target
we
countries?
particularly hunt for African national partners whenever we can, because we'd like to work as much locally as we can, because these scientists that Paul's describing they're very close to the problems and to the farmers.
Sure.
And oftentimes they've made real personal sacrifices and commitments to do this work. I mean, I'm thinking of Joseph Ndunguru, whose photo I showed you there. He had offers in Germany, Japan, and the United States, and South Africa, but he wanted to work like at home in Tanzania, close to farmers, and to deliver benefits to those farmers. And so when you find a partner like that who's very competent and committed, it's like gold. And plus, I have to say, from a financial point of view, it's a lot cheaper as well. I mean, you can do a lot more when you work with local partners, and they have a lot more understanding often of the issues involved. But actually, I did want to circle back on, because I think the question is a very good question about how do farmers get these varieties. So what Paul's describing is how these experimental cassava lines that have, protection built in against virus diseases and improved nutritional qualities, those are still at the testing stage. They're at the field testing stage. So this is how the partnership is being developed to do the field tests on the ground in Africa. But I think the question is also, well then, once you have improved varieties, how do they get to farmers? And so we have some other projects right now that the cassava is not as good as the cassava that's going to be coming from these field trials. It's kind of but farmers need something now. So sort of as an interim measure, we've been working on some projects to get clean cassava planting material, the best that's available, out to farmers. And there it tends to be a 3-stage process, because you can't have all the farmers going to the research station. It just won't be able to provide for everybody. So the research station provides some initial clean planting material. That grows out to what we call a primary multiplier, who's in a clean area, and it's very closely monitored to make sure that the material is clean. So they multiply it at that stage, and then it goes out to another multiplier, who tends to be farmer organizations or local non-government organizations, who then multiply it and then reach out to farmers. So you kind of it's a challenge at multiple steps to kind of multiply clean material.
And keeping it all coordinated
Right.
must be a bit of a challenge.
Yes, I mean it's not. It's yeah. I really respect and admire the folks that do it.
We have two related questions. Earlier in the conversation, we talked about the amount of crop lost to spoilage. And there are two questions on that. Dr. Khan, can you expand on spoilage is the biggest cause of spoilage moisture, mold, what else? And this one, if 40% of African crop yields are lost to spoilage, what science and investment is being done to specifically address the issue of spoilage?
Yeah, so those are great questions, and I'll preface them by saying I'm on the edge of my knowledge here because I'm not an expert at all in the spoilage questions, and I think it's multiple causes. We know when you visit an African farm, I was in Ethiopia the week before last, and the farmer was growing potatoes, and we went to see where he was storing these potatoes, and it was just this kind of shed that had this huge pile of potatoes in them. And, you know, it was moist in there. It's a perfect environment for fungi to take off and, you know, to infect the crop. There were probably rats that could get in fairly easily. So, I mean, I think it's multiple causes. It's diseases that hit them. It's rodents. So what can you do about that? Well, some of this...
And insects.
And insects, absolutely. Insects are huge. So, you know, so there are different things that you can do. So we have one project, actually, that involves just producing these plastic bags that can be sealed that farmers can put their product in to keep the insects out,
Like
to keep the
Ziploc
rodents
bags?
out. Yeah, they're sort of vacuum thick plastic bags, and so they've been quite effective with, I think, with cowpeas in West Africa, and so now we're looking to see can that be expanded.
These are a little bit bigger than a Ziploc bag. They're
Right.
about 100 pounds.
Oh, okay.
And
yeah,
very
that's more than
thick-
I put in
very
my
thick plastic,
refrigerator.
right.
Yeah.
So there's that sort of solution. I think we're also hoping that through this Grand Challenge exploration that we get new ideas coming in. Some of the solutions are going to be engineering. So are there ways that you can build cheaper structures, you know, that are with local materials? I mean, these solutions exist often, but it's how can you get them, what we say, to scale? How can you get them to reach many farmers in a way that's effective? And I don't think it's going to be one single answer, but I think there'll be multiple solutions. So if you've got crops that have inbuilt protection against fungal diseases, for example, some of the things that they're working on here at the Danforth Center, then those crops are less likely to spoil.
Mhm.
If you've got decent structures to keep your harvest in, then it's more likely to be with you for longer.
It's interesting, the bags that we were just talking about with respect to their trial use in cowpeas, and they are really only trial uses, I think, to this. They might be being exploited broader than that. But the people who used them actually saved so much more of their crop that it made it worth it to them to buy them. And so it became sustainable at that point. There was enough preserved food from the use of those bags that they had more to sell, and they actually had earned way more than enough money to buy new bags.
That seems to me to be an easier solution than in working to increase the yield. Just save the crop.
I agree.
Well, but I think it's multiple. I think it's multiple issues that
Sure.
often, people are spoiling. But I think, like, you know, you mentioned at the beginning about the complexity of the issue. So there are multiple reasons why people are losing crops, and we need to tackle as many of them as we can. So that includes post-harvest, but it includes, protecting crops in the field as well.
Now this last question, which I'm told we have time for one more, is a question that requires some imagination, but it's an interesting question. If you could click your heels, I had trouble with that, but I think that's
Right.
Dorothy and so on. What hotspot would you go to, and how would your work, your funding, change lives, and which crop or practice?
So we're only
Where
allowed to pick
where would you
one?
go, or what would you do?
So what, just to transport myself there and...
Yeah, what
and do
hotspot
something?
would you go to, and how would your work or funding change lives, and with what crop or practice?
Yeah, so, I mean, for me, one of the things I would say is that, like, I myself am not directly doing the work. So I'm helping to identify the project. So even if I was transported to Uganda or to Tanzania right now, just my landing there is not going to make a difference in the way that transporting, one of the scientists that you're training here from Tanzania or Uganda. So I guess, if I'm allowed to, like, not answer the question directly, I would choose to transport someone else there. Much as I love the place, but it's kind of like, where can you make the biggest difference? So what I would do is pick one of these fantastic scientists that you're training here in St. Louis and put that person, let's say in Tanzania, where the virus disease problems are just terrible with cassava, and there's really an opportunity to increase the yields that those farmers are getting right now.
I'll offer you an opportunity to be transported too.
I'd like that answer.
I think we're close to our hour, but there are three things that we haven't talked about that I think we'll need to have our guests back at some time. I would have asked more questions about climate change and the effect of that on yields and productivity. I would have asked more about energy and the environment. And then I would ask how productivity will have to increase to cope with rising population. We're 7 billion now. By 2050, we may be at 9 billion, maybe 10 billion. So we can't just get a little better, and we obviously can't stand still. We have an agricultural development problem in perpetuity, I should think, or at least for the longer than foreseeable future. Yeah.
Well, I can't let us end on that note of
but
I know.
skepticism, Jim. I'm sorry.
I'm giving the optimist an opportunity.
Right. Right. So, I think, what's so exciting now about science is, the advances that have been made in the last 20 years are opening up new possibilities. So, I do believe that we can develop crops that are much hardier against climate change, that are much more protected against diseases, that have better nutritional characteristics, and that we can deliver those to farmers. And when you get those in the hands of farmers, which, as we've discussed, is a big challenge, then those farmers are part of the solution. They're not the problem, but they're part of the solution to world hunger. And if we can give them the tools that they need, then farmers like Christina can grow more to feed their family and can sell the extra and can create their own pathways out of poverty. So I'm hopeful.
Good. I think we should end on a hopeful note. And now I want to call on Jim Carrington, the president of the Plant Science Center, to close with a few words.
All right, thank you very much, Jim. Thinking about what I would just wrap this up with, this is going to sound like a plug for what we're doing at the Danforth Center. And I'm not even going to try to fool you. It is. But what you heard about today was what we want to get science to and where we want to see science make a difference. You saw the end point in this continuum that we talk about a lot of what we do at the Danforth Center, which is to explore basic mechanisms of how plants work, and that includes those viruses and those fungi and molds that you heard about. And then we work on ways to take that knowledge that we learn here and that other people learn, and how to make those discoveries useful in some way. And then we take it to the point that you heard about, out into the field where people can actually use the information and have a better life. So you heard this, that was absolutely brilliant. And let me go back to the beginning of this, and because a lot of people don't understand why we spend so much time on the basic science here. You heard about virus-resistant plants. That's the end point of the 20 years Kathy talked about that started in laboratories like David Balcom, where we learned and made discoveries about how to make virus-resistant plants. That was 15, 20 years ago, and we're now seeing that work go through this continuum. Why do we need to keep doing this type of basic work? It's because the problems that we need to address next, or in 10 years, that moving target of problems, some of which we can anticipate, but a lot we can't anticipate. So we need to keep our eyes on this whole set of problems, not just at the basic discovery end, and not just at the implementation end, but view science as contributing all along the pathway. So I want to thank Kathy for coming. I hear it's Rainy and damp in the Northwest this time of year. Thanks for coming. At least we got you a little bit of sunshine. Paul, you're a great colleague. Thank you. And Jim Davis, as usual, great job. Thank you very much. I want to thank Matt Wolf for organizing the conversation series this year and welcome him on as chairman of the Friends Committee. It will be great working with you, Matt. And last, certainly not least, I want to thank Robin for your great service to the Danforth Center, specifically to the Friends Committee. You made a lot happen, and we all appreciate your work. Join me in thanking Robin. And finally, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you in a few months at the next Conversations.